I've been thinking, I really want to normalize the idea of streaming consciousness, allowing ourselves to be random, and having a dynamic sense of self. You know, I think since time immemorable, we've probably had this notion or idea that we need to be this archetype or this one type of person in a society. You're a teacher, you're a healer, you're an athlete, you're a mom, you're a dad, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, whatever it is, you're the garbage man. But obviously, we're all many, many more roles than that. And yet, somehow, in so many contexts, we're expected to compartmentalize and flip a switch and be a certain role at a certain time. No, I'm not saying if you're a surgeon and you're about to cut somebody open, that's the time to display your jester side or the comic relief. There's, of course, appropriate times to be funny, to be serious, to bring all parts of ourselves. I think there's more times than we give credence to where that should be allowed. I think with online marketing and creating brands for ourselves and this idea that we should be polished, fully finished, I guess this whole concept that we are our brand, it's a consumer concept. When you buy a vehicle, you want to buy a fully baked vehicle. You don't want to buy one that's missing tires or is still in the beta phase. But we're not vehicles. We are not meant to be consumed. And this is where I think we're going. I think we've been going for a very long time. I know that I fell prey to this idea through the human empowerment lens and the human potential movement. I really did believe for a very long time that there was some mystical, magical place to which I was going. And so long as I was in pursuit and so long as I blocked out any frequency, energy, people, experiences that didn't match with that, then I would eventually arrive. Now, I do have to say, there is something to be said for not allowing certain mindsets to penetrate and infiltrate our thinking. There's also something to be said for staying committed to a certain path so that you can actually get somewhere. I think anybody who's ever tried to change their body, for example, knows that you can't partially change your body. You can, but that's what's going to happen. In essence, yes, you have to be fully committed to something in order for that thing to take its course. I think the thing that I'm seeing in a very big way, at least at this stage of my life, and maybe it's always been the case for people in their midlife, is that what happens when you outgrow a path? What happens when you outgrow a mask? What happens when you pivot and change and life changes you so much that you can't really buy into any of the illusion that once was so enticing and so comforting and so motivating? There's there's a very real, deep need that I'm seeing in a lot of people about my age, late 30s to late 40s. That's about redefining ourselves, redefining what it means to be fully embodied and engaged in our life. I am so lucky that I've always had kind of an insatiable curiosity. I've always wondered about things, about how certain things feel, what they're like, what that way of being is like. At some point, I'm going to make some videos about where all the curiosity has led me. So I've had some really hilarious, wild, trippy, bizarre, horrible, amazing, unbelievable experiences, and I would love to normalize people sharing theirs as well. The ones that don't fit into a box, the ones that don't really make sense with your life arc. You know, the one that says, I've got my shit together, I figured it all out, I bought a house, I got the car, I got the kid, everything's happy. What the fuck are you supposed to do with that for 20 years, 30 years more? There's more life to live, and it's not just about making money, and it's not just about getting the kid to bed. There's a lot more, and we all need it. We all crave that sense of purpose, that sense of going somewhere. One reason that taking walks is so deeply healing and beneficial to our psyches, our body, and our minds is that we're actively going somewhere. It can even be an aimless walk, but it's the act of moving through space and time. It changes our awareness. It gives us a sense that things are shifting. Now, how do we create that in our lives if we don't have certain societal structures, let's say kids, where we have to get them from kindergarten to college? And what happens even if we do? And it still doesn't quite feel like it's scratching that itch. It's common. It's more common than anybody wants to admit. Now, I don't have kids. I'm not married, but I have a lot of people in my life. A ton. Family, friends, employees, coworkers, people I volunteer with, a partner. I've got a lot of people in my life, and I think a big element that we all crave, but maybe we don't have the framework to work with it, is the ability to be dynamic. Now, some of us have mastered that. We've figured out how to be vibrant and dynamic, engaged with so many parts of life. We're overbooked. We've got 1,000 meetings and places to go and people to see, and just feel such a full life. Good shit. Some of us haven't. And I think what starts to set in for people who are at that chapter and who haven't quite tapped into that is we start listening to the news more. Not in order to act or to get civically engaged or call our Congress people or volunteer more or fly overseas and actually take action. Just to give ourselves permission to be miserable. To say, look, the world's on fire. How could I possibly be okay? It is a very sobering time right now. I don't know a time that ever wasn't. That doesn't discount that it is sobering right now. People's lives are being lost. People in power are negligent at best, ruthless and inhumane at worst. It is a hard time. For those of us who are actually impacted day to day, it can actually feel bizarrely um, terrifying to know that we are somehow um, floating in this cosmic connection and yet not actually connected. I guess you could call it being out of touch in the sense of knowing that there's suffering all over the world and somehow being spared a bit of the survivor's guilt, maybe. Not to say that a survivor is suffering any more than an actual victim. Not to say that a white middle class woman who has all the privileges granted to her has any understanding of what true suffering of somebody in a different socioeconomic bracket, race, region, and other factors really is going through. But we are all connected, and we are all feeling a lot of, I think, existential dread. The sense that mommy and daddy are hurting and they don't have the answers. You know, when a kid experiences divorce, I think what happens in a way is a shattering of the illusion of containment, that there's a unit that's impenetrable and joined through love. And when it's shattered, there's a realization that, yeah, nothing's forever, anything can be broken, and that there's forces greater than love. Not dissimilarly, the same thing happens when societies shatter. There's a recognition that there are forces greater than love. And destruction is part of all of us. And maybe I'll speak for myself, but having really, really lived through many experiences where darkness and shadow and destruction seemed not only normal, but seductive, and at some points seemed like the only way. There didn't seem to be other alternatives. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have experienced that, where suffering felt like truth, where hopelessness felt like the actual water in which we're swimming. So, again, speaking from experience personally, anecdotally, and through knowing others, I do know that the shadow exists in all of us. In all of us. It's a human condition. Where in the fuck was I going with that? Yes, that's right. I think the antidote to the shadow is randomness, is to allow ourselves to fully express and be and witness all the myriad ways to be. Because a shadow is born of a repressed wanting, a repressed need, something repressed. And the repression comes from fear, and oftentimes the fear comes from lack of experience. I can't tell you how many times growing up somebody would say that they hated a Jew or a gay person, both of which I was and am. And of course, you can hide both those. I don't look Jewish. I do look gay these days with this haircut, but I didn't have it back then. And fear comes from not knowing. If you never know, you can create these huge stories in your head. So I think we can extrapolate that if we never leave our small town, if we never change our jobs, if we've never tried to experience a different way of being, it would make a lot of sense that we would be afraid of people being in those roles potentially, because we don't understand them. And even more to the point, we would fear that we couldn't leave our roles, that for some reason we would be stuck. Once a school teacher, always a school teacher. Once an addict, always an addict. And other lives. We can change at all times. We can pivot when something doesn't serve us. And you know what? We can hold on to identities and add new ones. I can be a healer and a body worker, and a damn good one. And I can also love fucking stand-up comedy, cussing, smoking an occasional cigarette, taking long walks, glass blowing, motorcycle riding. Did I already say that? You can be all sorts of things. It doesn't have to fit your brand. It really doesn't. And I think once we stop buying the stupid fucking lie that we need to be one brand, one consumable brand, we're going to be happier, healthier. We're going to be less manipulated. We're going to feel less desperate. We're going to ask more from people in power. And we're going to demand more of ourselves. We're going to say, I'm capable of more, therefore I need to do, be, and show up for more. Now, in a time where everybody's fucking exhausted, overworked, overstretched, boundaries, 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 learn how to say no, all these things, yes, that that's true. That is true. We are tired. We do need good boundaries, and we do need to learn how to say no. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't cut us off from each other? That doesn't make other people a problem when they have needs, basic human needs of connection, of wanting to express themselves, of not always being perfect at expressing themselves, but doing it anyway. I I was I I was the worst for a while. I became a master of manipulating conversations because I was really good at reading people. I had a background in NLP, human psychology, somatics, body worker. I read energy. So because I was so good at that, I expected others to be I expected them to be curating and manipulating their language based on the audience. And I would get pissed if they couldn't. How could you not see that that person wouldn't like you to say this thing? Why would you say it like that? This is the wrong kind of audience for that. I am so fucking mad at myself for projecting that into the world for so long. I've come to love people who don't filter based on their audience, who genuinely know themselves. Oh, somebody has a fire going. Smells fucking amazing. I love a good fire. Where was it going? Yes, who don't filter and curate their every word to be holding the emotional labor for the other people, but also manipulating them. It's manipulation. It's trying to be 1 or 10 steps ahead. And to be honest, coming from a recovering manipulator, it's so dark. It's really insidious, and it never allows the other person the autonomy to make their own decisions, which of course is the point when you're doing it. You want them to make decisions that you want based on what you're presenting to them. I think this is all related. I think we've gotten really good at branding ourselves, really good at boxing ourselves into being a certain way, really good at making ourselves palatable based on the audience we want to connect with or appease. But you know what's lost? And I feel it in such a real, I feel it like a canary in a coal mine. I feel like we're all suffocating on the smoke and mirrors, on the smoke and mirrors that we've created and boxed ourselves into. That somehow we are not meant to be dynamic, that somehow taking any risk is sign of a immature or volatile or reckless person. What if taking a little risk was exactly the point? What if taking a little risk interpersonally or physically or in a career or in a relationship or in our bodies or in our minds or in what we decided to study, who we decided to talk to, who our friends were, who we serve? What if we took a little risk in any of those fucking areas? There's so many areas to take a little bit of risk in. How would that change you? How would that change the world? I refuse to be a brand. I hope others refuse too. You can have a dykey haircut and a motorcycle shirt and be a body worker and wear Birkenstock. You can do all of it. And I think the world's better if we stop all acting like we're just these one-dimensional beings with these perfectly curated, branded interests and needs, because we're not. And personally, I don't want to hang out with that anyway. I want to be around somebody fun, dynamic, interesting, who's had a challenging life sometimes, but one that was earned. And the good news is, even if you've had a really curated, simple, comfortable life, You could change that now. And I'm not saying throw a wrench in your whole world, but what I am saying, find a little risk in any area of your life. You won't regret it.